I sat in my corner office at Walsh Industries, staring at my phone screen in complete disbelief. The photo showed Brandon Walsh, 24 years old and arrogant beyond measure, lounging in my leather chair with his designer sneakers propped up on my mahogany desk. His smug grin filled the frame as he held up a peace sign. The caption underneath made my blood boil. Running the company from the legal department today. Guess who's really in charge now? My colleagues had been forwarding me the screenshots all morning, their messages filled with sympathy and outrage. I set down my phone and walked to my filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder labeled Executive Contracts Confidential. As I flipped through the pages to find the document I needed, a slow smile spread across my face. My name is Cassandra Mills, and I had spent 12 years building my reputation at Walsh Industries. I started as a junior associate fresh out of Columbia Law School, working 16-hour days and weekends to prove myself in the male-dominated corporate world. Every contract I drafted, every negotiation I handled, every legal strategy I developed was carefully crafted to protect not just the company's interests, but the hard-working employees who depended on their jobs to feed their families. 4 years ago, when a hostile takeover attempt nearly destroyed Walsh Industries, I was the one who worked around the clock to restructure the executive contracts and save the company. Marcus Walsh, the 68-year-old CEO and founder, had trusted me completely during those dark months. He understood that my legal expertise was the only thing standing between his life's work and corporate raiders who would strip the company for parts. During those intense negotiations, I had insisted on adding what became known as Clause 14 to the succession agreement. The provision was buried deep in the legal language, requiring unanimous board approval before any family member could assume executive duties without meeting specific qualifications. 5 years of relevant industry experience, advanced education in business or related fields, and demonstrated leadership capabilities through independent achievements. At the time, Marcus had agreed readily, never imagining his son would one day try to waltz into the company straight from business school. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brandon Walsh had spent his college years partying at Stanford, barely maintaining the grades needed to graduate with his MBA. While I was building my career through merit and dedication, he was posting Instagram photos from Cabo and bragging about his trust fund. Now, at 24, he expected to inherit control of a $2 billion corporation simply because of his last name. Marcus Walsh had been like a father figure to me over the years. When my own dad passed away from cancer during my 3rd year at the firm, Marcus had personally ensured I had the time and support I needed. He understood loss and grief, having built his company from nothing after losing everything in a previous business venture. That shared understanding of struggle and perseverance had forged a bond between us that went beyond the typical employer-employee relationship. The company employed over 3,000 people across 12 states. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet to me. I knew Rebecca Thompson, the 52-year-old executive assistant who had been with the company for 20 years and was putting her youngest daughter through nursing school. I knew James Patterson, the veteran operations manager who had started in the warehouse and worked his way up through sheer determination. These people depended on Walsh Industries for their livelihoods, their health insurance, their retirement plans. But now Walsh Industries was facing serious financial challenges. The global supply chain disruptions had hurt manufacturing, and several key clients had delayed major orders. The board was considering merger discussions with larger corporations to ensure survival. In this precarious environment, leadership stability was crucial. Brandon's return from Stanford had been celebrated with great fanfare by Marcus, who desperately wanted to believe his son had matured. The young man talked a good game using business school buzzwords and presenting elaborate PowerPoint presentations about synergistic optimization and disruptive market positioning. But I saw through the polished veneer to the entitled brat underneath. His first week at the company had been a disaster. He reorganized 3 departments without consulting anyone, fired 2 longtime employees for questioning his authority, and made unilateral decisions about supplier contracts that violated existing agreements. The management team was in chaos, trying to clean up his mistakes while pretending everything was fine. Sandra Chen, our HR director and a close friend, had been documenting every incident carefully. She shared my concerns about Brandon's complete lack of understanding regarding employment law and corporate governance. David Rodriguez, the board chairman and Marcus's oldest friend, was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, but hesitated to confront Marcus directly about his son's incompetence. Walking back to my desk, I opened my laptop and began reviewing the succession documents once more. Every word, every clause, every provision had been crafted with surgical precision. I had learned from the best attorneys in corporate America, and my work was ironclad. Brandon Walsh might think he was running the company, but he had no idea what legal landmines I had carefully planted years ago. My phone buzzed with another screenshot from a colleague. This time, Brandon had posted a video of himself sitting in the executive conference room, feet up on the table, explaining to his followers how he was revolutionizing corporate culture and bringing fresh energy to a stagnant industry. The comments from his friends were filled with laughing emojis and congratulations on his new position. I saved the screenshot to my evidence folder and made a note of the timestamp. Everything Brandon was doing was creating a perfect paper trail of his arrogance and incompetence. He was documenting his own downfall without even realizing it. The afternoon brought news that made my stomach turn. Brandon had called an impromptu meeting with the department heads and announced his intention to modernize the company by eliminating what he called redundant positions and outdated practices. Translation: he planned to fire experienced employees and replace them with cheaper alternatives or automated systems. But the real shock came when I intercepted a phone call that Brandon thought was private. Standing outside the conference room during his afternoon break, I heard him speaking in hushed tones about confidential merger discussions. He was sharing specific financial details and strategic information with someone on the other end, information that could only have come from classified board documents. The voice on the other end belonged to someone from Phoenix Corporation, Walsh Industries' biggest competitor. They were discussing timeline details, client lists, and proprietary manufacturing processes. Brandon wasn't just being reckless with company operations. He was actively betraying his father's trust and endangering everything Marcus had built. My hands trembled as I realized the full scope of what I was witnessing. This wasn't simple nepotism or incompetence. This was corporate espionage, potentially criminal activity that could destroy Walsh Industries completely. Brandon Walsh wasn't just unqualified to run the company. He was planning to sell it out from under his own father. The next morning brought Brandon's most audacious move yet. He strode into the monthly company meeting, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than most employees made in a month. With Marcus sitting beside him, looking increasingly frail and confused, Brandon announced his promotion to Chief Operating Officer. The declaration caught everyone off guard, including several board members who exchanged worried glances across the conference table. Brandon's presentation outlined his vision for the company's future, complete with organizational charts that eliminated entire departments and flowcharts showing efficiency improvements that would result in massive layoffs. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences, using business school jargon to disguise what amounted to corporate vandalism. Rebecca Thompson sat in the back of the room, her face pale as Brandon announced the elimination of the Administrative Services Department. 20 years of loyal service, and she was being dismissed with the casual indifference of someone swatting a fly. James Patterson, our operations manager, watched in stunned silence as Brandon explained how automation would replace outdated human processes in manufacturing oversight. The changes began immediately. Employee benefits were cut under the guise of cost optimization. The company's traditional profit-sharing program, which had helped workers build retirement savings for decades, was eliminated to reinvest in growth initiatives. Health insurance premiums were shifted more heavily to employees, despite the company's insurance costs actually decreasing due to reduced coverage. I watched good people pack their offices and clear out their desks. Maria Rodriguez, a single mother who had worked in accounting for 8 years, was terminated for allegedly questioning Brandon's new expense reporting requirements. Tom Mitchell, a safety inspector who had prevented countless workplace accidents, was fired for resistance to change after pointing out that Brandon's new protocols violated federal safety regulations. Each termination was carefully documented in my growing file of evidence. I photographed the termination notices, recorded the stated reasons for dismissal, and interviewed affected employees about the circumstances. The pattern was clear. Anyone who questioned Brandon's authority or competence was eliminated. During board presentations, Brandon made a point of undermining my legal counsel. When I raised concerns about the legal implications of his proposed changes, he would interrupt with condescending remarks about old-school thinking and the need for adaptive legal frameworks. He suggested to the board that the company needed fresh legal perspective from attorneys who understood modern business dynamics. The personal humiliation was painful, but the broader implications were terrifying. Marcus Walsh appeared increasingly detached during these meetings, often seeming confused about basic company operations that he had managed brilliantly for decades. His responses were slower, his attention seemed scattered, and his once sharp business instincts appeared dulled. I attempted multiple times to speak with Marcus privately, but Brandon had implemented new security protocols that required his approval for any senior executive meetings. Suddenly, the man who had treated me like family was unreachable behind layers of bureaucracy created by his own son. Sandra Chen shared my growing alarm about Marcus's condition. As HR director, she had noticed subtle changes in his behavior and decision-making patterns. He was forgetting appointments, repeating conversations, and signing documents without his usual careful review. These weren't signs of normal aging for a man who had always been mentally sharp and physically active. My suspicions crystallized during a late evening visit to the executive floor. I had returned to retrieve some files and noticed Brandon emerging from his father's office carrying a coffee mug. Through the glass partition, I could see Marcus sitting at his desk looking dazed and rubbing his temples. Brandon set a fresh cup of coffee on the desk and spoke quietly to his father before leaving. Something about the interaction felt wrong. Marcus was normally alert and energetic during evening hours, often working late into the night on strategic planning. But tonight, he appeared sluggish and disoriented, struggling to focus on the documents in front of him. I began paying closer attention to Marcus's coffee consumption and the timing of his periods of confusion. The pattern became apparent within a week. Every morning, Brandon would bring his father coffee from a special thermos, claiming it was a new premium blend he had discovered. Within 30 minutes, Marcus would become noticeably less sharp, more agreeable to suggestions, and less likely to challenge Brandon's proposals. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Brandon wasn't just manipulating corporate documents and betraying company secrets. He was drugging his own father to maintain control over the business. The coffee ritual was a daily poisoning designed to keep Marcus compliant, while Brandon systematically dismantled everything the older man had built. But I needed proof. Accusations without evidence would be dismissed as paranoid conspiracy theories, especially given Brandon's growing influence with the board. I had to catch him in the act, while documenting everything in a way that would stand up in court. Setting up surveillance required careful planning. I installed a small recording device in the artificial plant outside Marcus's office, positioned to capture conversations near the coffee station. I also managed to obtain samples of the coffee grounds from Brandon's special thermos, carefully transferring them to sterile containers for future analysis. The breakthrough came on a Wednesday morning when I arrived early and positioned myself in the supply room adjacent to the executive offices. Through the slightly open door, I watched Brandon prepare his father's coffee with clinical precision. He opened a small vial containing white powder and measured carefully before stirring the mixture and sealing the thermos. My hands shook as I photographed the entire process using my phone's zoom function. Brandon's face showed no emotion as he poisoned his own father, treating it like any other routine business task. The casual cruelty of the act was breathtaking in its calculated malice. That afternoon brought the most devastating blow yet. Brandon announced during the management meeting that he had discovered financial irregularities in the legal department's budget allocation. According to his investigation, there were discrepancies suggesting possible embezzlement of company funds. He presented detailed spreadsheets showing unexplained expenses and questionable contract payments that appeared to trace back to my department. The evidence looked damning. Purchase orders bore my authorization signature. Expense reports showed payments to consultants I had allegedly hired, and bank records indicated transfers to accounts that appeared linked to my personal finances. Every document was professionally prepared and seemingly legitimate. David Rodriguez looked uncomfortable as he reviewed the materials, but the numbers told a convincing story of systematic theft over several months. Even Sandra Chen appeared shocked by the apparent scope of the financial misconduct. My protests of innocence sounded weak against such comprehensive documentation. Brandon's performance was masterful. He expressed disappointment and regret about discovering the irregularities, claiming he had hoped to handle the matter quietly but felt obligated to inform the board for the company's protection. He suggested immediate suspension pending a full investigation and possible criminal charges. The trap was perfectly constructed. Every piece of evidence had been carefully fabricated to point to my guilt, while Brandon positioned himself as the reluctant whistleblower protecting the company from internal corruption. He had anticipated my growing investigation and moved to eliminate me before I could expose his crimes. As the management team filed out of the conference room, avoiding eye contact and whispering among themselves, I realized the full extent of Brandon's strategic thinking. He wasn't just an entitled rich kid playing with daddy's company. He was a calculating predator who had been planning this takeover for months, eliminating every potential threat to his control. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following morning. 24 hours to prove my innocence and expose Brandon's conspiracy before losing everything I had worked 12 years to build. 24 hours to save Marcus Walsh from his own son and protect 3,000 innocent employees from corporate destruction. But Brandon had made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, he assumed I was just another obstacle to be removed through manipulation and false evidence. He had no idea that I had been preparing for exactly this kind of attack since the day I first met him. Every contract I had written, every clause I had inserted, every legal protection I had implemented was about to become his worst nightmare. The emergency board meeting convened at 8 o'clock sharp in the company's main conference room. David Rodriguez called the session to order with obvious reluctance, clearly uncomfortable with the accusations against me, but bound by fiduciary duty to investigate potential financial crimes. The other board members, longtime associates of Marcus Walsh, wore expressions of disappointment and confusion. Brandon arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a thick portfolio of evidence and wearing an expression of grave concern that would have been convincing to anyone who didn't know his true nature. He had prepared additional materials overnight, including forensic accounting reports that traced the alleged embezzlement through multiple layers of financial transactions. Marcus sat at his usual place at the head of the table, but his appearance shocked me. His normally sharp eyes appeared cloudy and unfocused. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup, and his usually immaculate appearance seemed disheveled. The effects of whatever Brandon was giving him had clearly intensified over recent weeks. The presentation began with Brandon expressing deep regret about the situation, while methodically laying out the evidence against me. Bank statements showed regular transfers to consulting firms that appeared to have no legitimate business purpose. Contract authorizations bore my signature approving payments for services that were never rendered. Expense reports documented travel and entertainment costs that seemed designed to benefit me personally rather than serve company interests. Sandra Chen reviewed the HR implications, noting that the alleged misconduct violated multiple company policies and potentially criminal statutes. Her reluctance was obvious, but the evidence appeared overwhelming. Even James Patterson, who had worked closely with me for years, seemed convinced by the documentation. As each piece of evidence was presented, I remained calm and took detailed notes. Brandon had indeed constructed an elaborate frame, but his arrogance had led him to make subtle errors that someone with my legal training could identify. The signatures were excellent forgeries, but the pen pressure was inconsistent with my natural writing style. The bank records were convincing, but the timestamps showed transactions occurring during periods when I was attending depositions or court hearings in other cities. When David Rodriguez asked for my response to the allegations, I stood slowly and walked to the presentation screen. Instead of defending myself against Brandon's accusations, I began presenting my own evidence collected over the previous weeks through careful surveillance and documentation. The first item was a recorded conversation between Brandon and someone at Phoenix Corporation discussing the transfer of proprietary manufacturing processes and confidential client information. The audio quality was crystal clear, and Brandon's voice was unmistakable as he provided specific details about Walsh Industries' upcoming merger negotiations and financial vulnerabilities. The room fell silent as the recording played. Board members exchanged shocked glances while Brandon's confident expression began to crack. The conversation lasted 12 minutes and included detailed discussions of timeline for corporate espionage methods for accessing classified documents and compensation arrangements for insider information. Next, I presented medical evidence regarding Marcus's condition. Working with Sandra Chen, I had arranged for a discreet collection of hair samples from Marcus's office chairs and clothing. Independent laboratory analysis revealed significant levels of benzodiazepine compounds, specifically lorazepam, which explained his recent cognitive impairment and uncharacteristic compliance with Brandon's suggestions. The photographic evidence of Brandon preparing the drugged coffee was damning. The images clearly showed him adding powder to the thermos while wearing latex gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Additional photos documented him disposing of the vial in a bathroom trash container, which I had subsequently retrieved and tested. But the most devastating evidence was Brandon's own social media activity. His posts and private messages, which I had obtained through legal channels after discovering his corporate espionage, revealed extensive communications with Phoenix Corporation executives dating back 6 months. The messages discussed specific strategies for undermining Walsh Industries' financial stability and acquiring key assets at below-market prices. As I systematically dismantled every piece of Brandon's fabricated evidence against me, his composure completely collapsed. The sophisticated facade crumbled to reveal the frightened child underneath someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions and was unprepared for serious opposition. The forensic analysis of the financial documents showed clear signs of digital manipulation. The expense reports had been created using software that left distinctive metadata signatures. The bank statements contained transaction codes that were inconsistent with the actual banking systems used by Walsh Industries' financial institutions. David Rodriguez stopped the proceedings twice to consult with the company's external legal counsel via phone conference. The evidence I was presenting had serious criminal implications that went far beyond internal corporate misconduct. We were discussing federal crimes, including securities fraud, corporate espionage, and elder abuse. Marcus Walsh, despite his drugged state, began showing signs of awareness as the full scope of his son's betrayal became clear. The man who had built Walsh Industries from nothing was watching his own child systematically destroy everything he had created while poisoning him to prevent interference. Brandon's attempt to deny the recordings failed when I produced additional evidence from his personal devices obtained through legitimate discovery procedures after filing preliminary criminal complaints with federal authorities. His communications revealed not just the Phoenix Corporation conspiracy, but additional plans to liquidate company assets and transfer the proceeds to offshore accounts. The board voted unanimously to suspend Brandon from all company positions effective immediately. David Rodriguez contacted federal law enforcement to report the criminal activities, while Sandra Chen began procedures to secure all company computer systems and financial accounts to prevent further damage. But Brandon wasn't finished. As security prepared to escort him from the building, he stood up with a final smirk and announced that none of this mattered. He had installed malware in the company's central database servers, programmed to activate if he didn't enter a specific code every 24 hours. In 18 hours, every client file, financial record, and operational document would be permanently erased. The ultimatum was simple: restore his position and drop all charges, or watch Walsh Industries collapse completely when its entire informational infrastructure disappeared. 3,000 jobs, decades of client relationships, and billions of dollars in assets would be destroyed unless his demands were met. The magnitude of his final gambit left the room in stunned silence. Even if we proved his crimes and sent him to prison, he could still destroy the company out of pure spite. The malware represented a doomsday device that would eliminate any victory we might achieve through legal channels. David Rodriguez asked the obvious question: how could we verify his claims and locate the malware before it activated? Brandon's response was chilling in its calculated cruelty. The code was hidden throughout the system using advanced encryption, and only he knew the deactivation sequence. Any attempt to find it through traditional methods would trigger immediate activation. As security held Brandon at the conference room door, he looked directly at me with cold satisfaction. He had anticipated my investigation and prepared this final trap to ensure his victory regardless of what evidence I might present. Even from a federal prison cell, he could destroy everything we were trying to protect. But Brandon had made one fatal error in his planning. He assumed that I had only been investigating his recent activities when, in fact, I had been preparing for this exact scenario since the day I first met him. The malware trap was sophisticated, but I had taken precautions he could never have imagined. 18 hours to save the company or watch everything Marcus Walsh had built disappear forever. The clock was ticking, and Brandon Walsh was about to learn that underestimating Cassandra Mills had been the biggest mistake of his privileged life. The conference room erupted into controlled chaos as the implications of Brandon's malware threat became clear. David Rodriguez immediately contacted the company's IT security team, while Sandra Chen began coordinating with federal cybercrime investigators. The next 18 hours would determine whether Walsh Industries survived or became another cautionary tale about corporate sabotage. Brandon was placed under immediate arrest by federal agents who had been standing by outside the building. His final smirk suggested complete confidence that his doomsday device would achieve his goals even if he couldn't personally enjoy the victory. As they led him away in handcuffs, he shouted back that the company had 16 hours and 43 minutes to meet his demands. The IT team, led by Chief Information Officer Patricia Kumar, began the desperate search for hidden malware throughout the massive computer network. Walsh Industries' systems contained decades of client information, proprietary manufacturing processes, financial records, and operational data that represented the entire value of the company. Federal cybersecurity experts arrived within 2 hours, bringing specialized equipment for detecting and neutralizing sophisticated digital threats. Their preliminary assessment was grim. The malware was likely distributed across multiple servers using advanced encryption techniques that would require days or weeks to locate and remove safely. Meanwhile, I was having a very different conversation with Patricia Kumar in her secure IT office. 3 weeks earlier, I had approached her with concerns about potential cyber threats from internal sources. Working together, we had implemented a comprehensive backup and security protocol that went far beyond the company's standard procedures. Patricia had created an entirely separate mirror network hidden from the primary systems, but containing real-time copies of all critical data. Every financial record, client file, operational procedure, and strategic document was automatically replicated to secure servers that were completely isolated from Brandon's potential access points. The backup system had been disguised as a routine disaster recovery upgrade, approved through normal IT governance channels without attracting attention. Even if Brandon's malware successfully destroyed the primary network, we could restore everything from the hidden mirrors within 24 hours. But I had taken an additional precaution that Brandon couldn't possibly have anticipated. Working with Patricia, I had identified the specific network access points that Brandon used during his late evening sessions in the office. By monitoring his digital activities, we had discovered his attempts to plant malware weeks before his final ultimatum. Instead of preventing his sabotage attempts, we had allowed him to proceed while carefully documenting every step of the process. The malware was real and dangerous, but we knew exactly where it was located and how it functioned because we had watched him install it. The countdown timer that Brandon was relying on was actually a decoy we had allowed him to implement. The real malware had already been neutralized and replaced with harmless code that would generate impressive-looking error messages without actually damaging any systems. As federal investigators worked frantically to locate threats that had already been resolved, I prepared for the most challenging conversation of my career. Marcus Walsh needed to understand the full scope of his son's betrayal while dealing with the effects of weeks of chemical manipulation. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the company's occupational health physician, had been quietly monitoring Marcus's condition since I first shared my concerns about potential poisoning. Blood tests confirmed significant levels of sedatives in his system, but the effects were beginning to clear as the daily coffee routine had been interrupted by the crisis. The conversation with Marcus was heartbreaking. Watching him realize that his own son had been systematically poisoning him while stealing company secrets required every ounce of professional compassion I could summon. The man who had mentored me for over a decade was grappling with betrayal that cut to the very core of his identity as both a father and a business leader. But Marcus Walsh hadn't built a successful company through weakness. As his mental clarity returned, the steel that had carried him through previous crises began to reassert itself. He authorized full cooperation with federal investigators and gave me unlimited authority to coordinate the company's response to Brandon's crimes. The media attention was intense. News crews gathered outside the building as word spread about the arrest of a CEO's son on federal charges. The stock price fluctuated wildly as investors tried to assess the potential damage to company operations. Client companies began calling to express concerns about the security of their confidential information. I spent the afternoon managing communications with major clients, regulatory agencies, and industry partners. The message was carefully crafted. Walsh Industries had discovered and neutralized an internal security threat, working closely with federal authorities to ensure complete protection of client interests. The Phoenix Corporation connection provided additional vindication for our response. Federal investigators raided their offices simultaneously, uncovering extensive evidence of industrial espionage and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. The competing companies' stock price collapsed as their own criminal activities were exposed. By evening, Brandon's confidence was beginning to crack. Federal agents had presented him with overwhelming evidence of his crimes, including detailed documentation of the malware installation process that we had secretly recorded. His legal representation advised cooperation, but Brandon continued insisting that his doomsday device would activate regardless of what happened to him. The countdown reached 6 hours when I made my final move. Accompanied by federal agents and company security, I visited Brandon in his holding cell to offer what appeared to be a negotiated settlement. The company would consider reduced charges in exchange for the malware deactivation codes, preserving his family relationships while allowing the business to survive. Brandon's arrogance was remarkable even under these circumstances. He gloated about his technical sophistication, explaining in detail how he had distributed the malware across multiple systems using advanced encryption that would be impossible to locate without his specific knowledge. Every word was being recorded by federal investigators as Brandon provided a complete confession to cyber terrorism charges. His detailed explanation of the malware functionality gave prosecutors everything they needed to ensure maximum penalties under federal cybercrime statutes. When he finally provided what he believed were the deactivation codes, I thanked him with apparent sincerity while Patricia Kumar entered the sequences into her system. The harmless decoy code accepted his input and generated impressive displays showing malware neutralization across multiple servers. Brandon's relief was visible as he watched the computer screens confirm that his doomsday device had been successfully disarmed. He had no idea that we had been watching him install the malware for weeks, documenting every step of the process while preparing our own countermeasures. The final revelation came as federal agents prepared to transfer Brandon to a maximum security facility pending trial. I explained that the countdown timer he had been relying on was fake, installed by our IT team to make him believe his malware was still active. The real threats had been neutralized weeks ago, and all company data was completely secure. The expression on Brandon's face was worth every sleepless night I had spent preparing for this moment. The entitled brat who thought he could destroy his father's life work through technical intimidation realized he had been outmaneuvered at every step by someone he had dismissed as just another employee. Federal prosecutors indicated that Brandon would face charges including corporate espionage, securities fraud, elder abuse, cyber terrorism, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming, and the penalties would likely result in 15 to 20 years in federal prison. As dawn broke over Walsh Industries, the crisis was finally over. The company's systems were completely secure, client data was protected, and Brandon Walsh was beginning his journey through the federal justice system. But the real work of rebuilding trust and restoring stability was just beginning. The morning after Brandon's arrest brought a flood of activity as Walsh Industries began the complex process of recovery and rebuilding. Federal investigators had completed their initial sweep of company systems, confirming that all client data remained secure and that the malware threat had been completely neutralized. Marcus Walsh called an emergency meeting with all department heads to address the crisis directly. His mental clarity had returned dramatically as the effects of weeks of involuntary sedation cleared from his system. The man who had seemed confused and disoriented just days earlier was now sharp-focused and determined to restore his company's integrity. The board of directors convened an emergency session to address the succession crisis and governance failures that had allowed Brandon to gain such destructive influence. David Rodriguez led discussions about implementing stronger oversight procedures and updating corporate policies to prevent future internal threats. My role in exposing the conspiracy had elevated my position within the company dramatically. Marcus formally appointed me as General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer with expanded authority to review all executive decisions and implement enhanced security protocols. The first priority was addressing the damage Brandon had inflicted on company operations and personnel. Rebecca Thompson was immediately reinstated to her position with full back pay and a promotion to Senior Administrative Director. Her 20 years of loyal service had been recognized, and she would lead efforts to rebuild the administrative infrastructure that Brandon had dismantled. James Patterson received similar treatment, being promoted to Vice President of Operations and given authority to rehire the experienced workers Brandon had terminated. His institutional knowledge and respected leadership would be crucial for restoring operational efficiency and employee morale. Maria Rodriguez returned as Senior Accounting Manager with additional responsibilities for financial oversight and fraud prevention. Tom Mitchell was promoted to Chief Safety Officer with expanded authority to ensure compliance with all regulatory requirements. The process of rehiring wrongfully terminated employees took several weeks, but the response was overwhelmingly positive. People who had been dismissed for questioning Brandon's authority were eager to return to a company that now valued experience and integrity over nepotism and arrogance. Employee benefits were restored to previous levels, with additional improvements implemented as part of the rebuilding process. The profit-sharing program was reinstated with retroactive payments for the period it had been suspended. Health insurance coverage was expanded and new programs were added to support employee professional development. The media coverage initially focused on the sensational aspects of the story: a CEO's son arrested for poisoning his father and attempting corporate sabotage. But as more details emerged, the narrative shifted to highlight Walsh Industries' effective response to internal threats and commitment to ethical business practices. Federal prosecutors moved quickly to build their case against Brandon Walsh. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded conversations with Phoenix Corporation executives documented instances of drugging his father, extensive proof of the malware installation, and financial records showing attempted embezzlement. Brandon's legal team attempted to negotiate plea agreements, but the scope of his crimes made meaningful reduction in charges impossible. Corporate espionage, elder abuse, and cyber terrorism carried mandatory minimum sentences that would keep him imprisoned for decades. The Phoenix Corporation connection proved even more damaging for our competitors. Federal raids uncovered years of industrial espionage targeting multiple companies throughout the industry. Their stock price collapsed completely, and several executives faced criminal charges for conspiracy and securities fraud. Client companies that had initially expressed concerns about security were impressed by Walsh Industries' proactive response to internal threats. Several major contracts that had been delayed pending security reviews were approved with enhanced terms favoring our company. The company's stock price recovered strongly as investors recognized that the crisis had actually demonstrated effective corporate governance and security capabilities. Quarterly earnings exceeded projections as improved management and restored employee morale translated into operational efficiency. Marcus Walsh used the crisis as an opportunity to implement succession planning that would prevent future problems. The board established clear criteria for executive appointments based on merit and experience rather than family relationships. Independent oversight committees were created to monitor all major business decisions. My expanded role included developing comprehensive legal frameworks for corporate governance, employee protection, and security protocols. The experience of uncovering Brandon's conspiracy had highlighted vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed through systematic policy changes. The legal clinic I established for employees facing workplace injustice became a model program that attracted attention from other corporations and legal professionals. Providing accessible legal resources for workers helped build trust while preventing internal conflicts from escalating into serious problems. 6 months after Brandon's arrest, Walsh Industries had not only recovered from the crisis, but had emerged stronger than before. Employee satisfaction surveys showed record high levels of trust in company leadership. Client retention rates exceeded 95%, and new business development was ahead of projected targets. The federal trial proceedings provided additional vindication for our response to the crisis. Brandon's conviction on all charges resulted in a sentence of 18 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The judge specifically noted the sophistication of his criminal planning and the potential for catastrophic damage to thousands of innocent employees. Phoenix Corporation filed for bankruptcy as their criminal exposure made continued operations impossible. Several of their key clients transferred their business to Walsh Industries, recognizing our superior security practices and ethical standards. Marcus Walsh received recognition from industry organizations for his leadership during the crisis and commitment to ethical business practices. The company's response became a case study in business schools for effective crisis management and corporate governance. But the most meaningful recognition came from the employees whose livelihoods had been protected through our actions. Rebecca Thompson organized a company-wide appreciation event acknowledging the legal team's role in saving their jobs and preserving the company's integrity. Standing before 3,000 employees who still had secure employment because of our successful investigation, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from protecting people who depend on you. Brandon Walsh had tried to destroy everything his father had built, but he had underestimated the power of preparation, integrity, and determination. The lesson was clear: entitlement and privilege are no match for competence and ethical commitment. Brandon's arrogance had blinded him to the legal protections I had carefully constructed years earlier, and his assumption that he could intimidate me into submission had been his fatal mistake. As Marcus Walsh announced record quarterly profits and expanded hiring plans, the true victory became apparent. Walsh Industries wasn't just surviving Brandon's attempted sabotage. The company was thriving because we had turned his destructive actions into an opportunity for positive change and stronger foundations. The final phase of Brandon's legal proceedings provided the ultimate vindication for everything we had endured. Federal prosecutors presented a comprehensive case that detailed every aspect of his criminal conspiracy, from the initial contact with Phoenix Corporation executives to the sophisticated malware designed to destroy company data. The prosecution's star witness was Brandon himself. The recordings I had made of his confession in the holding cell, where he had detailed his technical methods and criminal intentions, provided prosecutors with everything they needed for maximum sentences under federal cybercrime statutes. Brandon's defense attorney attempted to portray him as a misguided young man who had made poor decisions under pressure, but the evidence of premeditation and systematic planning made such arguments impossible to sustain. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 18 federal charges. The sentencing hearing drew national media attention as a landmark case involving corporate espionage and cyber terrorism. Victim impact statements from Walsh Industries employees provided powerful testimony about the human cost of Brandon's crimes and the fear that had gripped the company during his brief reign of terror. Marcus Walsh's statement was particularly moving as he described the betrayal of watching his own son systematically poison him while destroying everything he had built. The judge noted that elder abuse combined with corporate crimes represented especially serious violations of trust and family bonds. The federal judge imposed the maximum sentence allowable under the guidelines: 22 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, followed by 5 years of supervised release with restrictions on computer access and corporate employment. Brandon would be nearly 50 years old before regaining his freedom, and his criminal record would prevent him from ever holding positions of corporate authority. Phoenix Corporation's executives received similarly harsh sentences for their role in the conspiracy. The corporate espionage ring had targeted dozens of companies over several years, causing millions of dollars in damages to American businesses and threatening thousands of jobs throughout multiple industries. The broader implications of the case led to congressional hearings on corporate security and internal threats. My testimony before the House Subcommittee on Cybersecurity became part of the legislative record supporting new laws protecting companies and employees from insider threats and corporate sabotage. Walsh Industries' response to the crisis became a model for other corporations facing similar challenges. The security protocols we developed were adopted by industry organizations as best practices for preventing and detecting internal threats to corporate operations and employee safety. The company's financial performance in the year following Brandon's arrest exceeded all projections. Stock prices reached record highs as investors recognized the value of strong corporate governance and ethical leadership. Major clients signed long-term contracts, citing confidence in our security practices and commitment to protecting their interests. My expanded role as General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer involved traveling to other companies and industry conferences to share lessons learned from our experience. The legal frameworks we developed for employee protection and corporate security were implemented by businesses across multiple sectors. The Employee Legal Clinic continued growing, providing services not just to Walsh Industries workers, but to people throughout the region facing workplace injustice. The program attracted support from legal aid organizations and became a permanent fixture in the company's community outreach efforts. Marcus Walsh used his restored health and energy to focus on strategic planning and mentorship programs for young professionals. His experience with Brandon had taught him the importance of developing leadership based on merit and character, rather than family connections or inherited privilege. The succession planning process that emerged from the crisis ensured that future leadership transitions would be based on competence, experience, and demonstrated commitment to company values. Independent oversight committees provided safeguards against any individual gaining unchecked authority over company operations. Rebecca Thompson's promotion to Senior Administrative Director had transformed her from a potential victim of Brandon's purges into a key leader in the company's recovery and growth. Her institutional knowledge and relationships with longtime employees proved invaluable for rebuilding trust and operational efficiency. James Patterson's elevation to Vice President of Operations allowed him to implement safety and quality improvements that had been delayed during Brandon's chaotic tenure. His 30 years of experience provided stability and continuity that helped restore confidence among both employees and clients. The broader industry impact of our successful response to corporate espionage helped strengthen security practices across multiple sectors. Other companies implemented similar monitoring and backup systems to protect against internal threats and ensure business continuity during crises. Federal cybersecurity agencies used our case as an example of effective public-private cooperation in combating corporate crimes. The documentation and evidence we provided helped prosecutors build stronger cases against other corporate espionage rings operating throughout the country. The legal precedents established through Brandon's prosecution strengthened penalties for insider threats and corporate sabotage. Future criminals would face enhanced sentences for crimes involving elder abuse, cyber terrorism, and conspiracy to destroy corporate infrastructure. But the most personally satisfying outcome was the transformation of Walsh Industries into a company that truly protected and valued its employees. The crisis had revealed the importance of legal safeguards and ethical leadership lessons that would guide company operations for generations to come. Standing in the same conference room where Brandon had attempted to destroy my career and eliminate my investigation, I reflected on the journey from that first arrogant social media post to his federal prison sentence. His assumption that intelligence preparation and integrity could be defeated through privilege and intimidation had been completely wrong. The clause I had inserted into the succession agreement 4 years earlier had provided the legal foundation for our response, but the real victory came from the careful preparation and ethical commitment that guided every step of our investigation. Brandon Walsh had spent months planning his corporate takeover, but I had spent years preparing defenses he never saw coming. As Marcus Walsh announced plans for continued expansion and new employee benefit programs, the complete reversal of Brandon's destructive vision was apparent. Instead of a stripped-down company optimized for short-term profit extraction, Walsh Industries was becoming a model of sustainable business practices and employee protection. The final irony was that Brandon's attempts to destroy his father's legacy had ultimately strengthened everything Marcus Walsh had worked to build. The company emerged from the crisis with better security, stronger governance, improved employee relations, and enhanced reputation for ethical business practices. 22 years in federal prison would give Brandon Walsh plenty of time to consider the consequences of underestimating Cassandra Mills and the legal protections I had carefully constructed to defend against exactly his kind of privileged corruption. 2 years have passed since that morning when I first saw Brandon Walsh's arrogant social media post from my desk. As I sit in my expanded office now serving as General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer of Walsh Industries, I can see the transformed company campus through windows that overlook a workforce of over 4,000 dedicated employees. The legal clinic I established has helped more than 300 workers resolve workplace disputes and protected countless others from various forms of employment discrimination. Rebecca Thompson, now in her role as Senior Administrative Director, often stops by to discuss new cases and share success stories from employees who found justice through our programs. Marcus Walsh recovered completely from the effects of his son's poisoning and has become one of the most respected leaders in American industry. His speaking engagements at business schools and corporate conferences focus on the importance of ethical leadership and the dangers of nepotism in family businesses. The company's financial performance continues to exceed projections quarter after quarter. Employee satisfaction surveys consistently show record-high ratings for trust in leadership, job security, and workplace fairness. Our retention rate is among the highest in the industry, with many workers choosing to build entire careers at Walsh Industries. Brandon Walsh is currently serving his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Colorado, where he will remain for the next 20 years. Prison records indicate he works in the facility's library and has enrolled in correspondence courses, though his computer access remains severely restricted as part of his sentence. Phoenix Corporation's bankruptcy was finalized 18 months ago, with their assets sold to competitors who pledged to maintain ethical business practices. Several of their former clients have become major accounts for Walsh Industries, citing our demonstrated commitment to security and integrity. The congressional legislation that emerged from our case has strengthened protections against corporate espionage and insider threats throughout American industry. Companies across multiple sectors have implemented security protocols based on the frameworks we developed during our crisis response. My testimony in subsequent federal cases has helped prosecutors build successful cases against other corporate criminals. The legal precedents established through Brandon's prosecution continue to deter insider threats and provide stronger penalties for those who attempt to exploit positions of trust. The most meaningful recognition came last month when Marcus Walsh announced the establishment of the Cassandra Mills Ethics Fellowship, a scholarship program for law students who demonstrate commitment to corporate ethics and employee protection. The first recipients will begin their studies this fall at universities across the country, but the deepest satisfaction comes from the daily interactions with employees who know their jobs are secure and their rights are protected. The maintenance worker who approaches me in the hallway to thank me for saving his pension, the single mother in accounting who knows she has legal recourse if she faces discrimination, the safety inspector who can report violations without fear of retaliation. These are the real victories that matter more than any corporate award or legal recognition. Every person who goes home to their family knowing they have stable employment and fair treatment represents the true measure of our success in defeating Brandon Walsh's destructive ambitions. The experience taught me that genuine power comes not from inherited privilege or family connections, but from competence, preparation, and unwavering commitment to protecting those who depend on you. Brandon's arrogance blinded him to the legal safeguards I had spent years constructing, and his assumption that intimidation could overcome integrity proved to be his fatal miscalculation. The clause in the succession agreement was just one element of a comprehensive legal framework designed to protect Walsh Industries from internal threats. But the real strength came from understanding that business leadership requires earning trust through consistent ethical behavior, rather than demanding compliance through fear and manipulation. Marcus Walsh often says that Brandon's betrayal was the greatest crisis of his professional life, but also the catalyst for transforming Walsh Industries into the company he had always envisioned. The systematic reforms we implemented during the recovery created foundations for sustainable growth and ethical practices that will guide operations for decades to come. Today's workforce includes many employees who might have lost their jobs if Brandon's corporate sabotage had succeeded. Their continued employment, secure benefits, and opportunities for advancement represent the lasting legacy of our successful investigation and legal response. The legal clinic continues expanding its services, and we're developing partnerships with other companies to create industry-wide programs for workplace justice. The model we pioneered at Walsh Industries is being replicated across multiple sectors, providing hope for workers facing various forms of corporate abuse. As I review the quarterly reports showing record profits alongside record employee satisfaction, the complete reversal of Brandon's destructive vision is apparent. Instead of a stripped-down operation designed for quick asset extraction, Walsh Industries has become a model of how businesses can succeed while maintaining strong ethical standards and genuine care for their workforce. The young man who thought he could intimidate me into submission while poisoning his own father learned that underestimating someone's intelligence and preparation carries severe consequences. 22 years in federal prison provides plenty of time for reflection on the mistakes that led to his downfall. But this story isn't really about Brandon Walsh's crimes or his inevitable punishment. It's about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when facing overwhelming opposition from those who believe their privilege entitles them to destroy others without consequence. Every day brings new opportunities to protect workers, strengthen ethical standards, and demonstrate that competence and integrity will always triumph over entitlement and corruption. The battle for workplace justice is ongoing, but our victory over Brandon Walsh's conspiracy proves that preparation, determination, and unwavering ethical commitment can overcome any challenge. The next time someone assumes they can manipulate or intimidate their way to success at the expense of others, they might want to remember what happened when Brandon Walsh made that fatal error in judgment. Clause 14 was waiting, and so was Cassandra Mills. Have you ever faced a situation where someone's arrogance and sense of entitlement made them underestimate your capabilities? How did you handle workplace bullying or corporate injustice in your own career? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below about times when preparation and integrity helped you overcome unfair treatment. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up to help others find inspiration in standing up for what's right. Subscribe to hear more stories about workplace justice and the importance of protecting those who depend on us. Share this with anyone who might be facing similar challenges in their professional life. Because sometimes we all need reminding that competence and ethical commitment can defeat privilege and corruption. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that every workplace has the potential for justice when people are willing to stand up for what's right. Keep fighting for fairness, keep protecting those around you, and never let anyone convince you that their position gives them the right to harm others without consequences.